Good evening, everyone. Let's cultivate our motivation. So somehow, partly in this life, but through great effort and many, many past lives, we've created the causes and conditions to be interested in the Dharma and to pursue that interest in this life with enthusiasm and an effort. And when we look around, first of all, maybe considering our family and friends, we can see that perhaps we're the only member of our family who's interested in the Dharma. Perhaps not. But we can then look at our friends, and we may have some friends interested and we may not. But if we look at the planet, very few people either have the interest or the causes and conditions to meet the Dharma. And so we can really appreciate this situation that we have and really value the fact that we have this interest, the fact we've met an authentic teacher, or maybe many authentic teachers, and that our teachers are constantly reminding us about what to cultivate and what to step away from doing. And also to keep our mind infused with this bodhicitta aspiration, the long-term goal to become fully awakened, so that eventually we'll be able to be of benefit to all beings. So let's just take a moment to really reflect on this remarkable opportunity that we're having. So Venerable Children is still away. She's now in India, and she's there to start receiving teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I think it starts tonight. So here we are at the Abbey, and we're going to be reviewing some of these remarkable teachings on the Gomchen Lamrim. And I've got a few pages here. I'm reviewing 3 different talks she's given. And the biggest challenge I've had in getting this talk together, this review, is to try and figure out what to include and what to leave out. So we'll see how the time goes here. I may be leaving out more and more things, but we'll see. And it's just been really tremendous to go through this material again and just to see how fantastic this is. So the text that we're going to review is called the Gomchen Lamrim. And this is a text written by Gomchen Nawang Drukpa. Gomchen means great meditator. And Gomchen Nawang Drukpa was a disciple of Je Lodra Tenpa, who was the 6th Ganden Tripa. Ganden was the monastery started by Je Tsongkhapa. So this text, the Gomchen Lamrim, is like a condensation of Je Rinpoche, Je Tsongkhapa's middle-length Lamrim. And it is really designed for meditators. So in the same way with the easy path that Venerable taught this past year, which is also designed for meditators, this particular text goes into a bit more depth about how to approach each topic. So the Lamrim can be translated in many ways. Some people call it the stages of the path, or steps on the path, or the gradual path. The gradual path reminds us, though, that the process of transforming the mind, unlike so many other things in our hurry-up society, is a slow and thoughtful one. So last week, Venerable Tarpa took us very carefully through the 6 preparatory practices. And we're going to start tonight with the actual meditation, how to meditate in general, and how to do so in the present context. So that's where we'll start. So how to meditate in general. If you wish to make your mind receptive to virtue, you must be sure of the order and number of meditational topics. Using mindfulness and introspective awareness, be intent upon them. Otherwise, the virtuous practices of a lifetime will be flawed. So what this is telling us is that in order to meditate, we have to know what the meditation topics are. We have to know the 6 preparatory practices. We have to be sure of the meditation order of the topics. And we have to pay attention to them with mindfulness of the points and with introspective awareness, and to make sure we're concentrating on those points. So there's a section that Venerable goes into about how to do so in the present context. We're going to just move past that one and go to what to conclude. And then we'll come back to this middle point. So she says, at any time that you do any kind of meditation, it's so critical to dedicate the virtue of the practice. And that also when we do that, to make it really more impactful, we want to think of the emptiness of the circle of 3. So, in other words, ourself is the one who's dedicating the merit that's being dedicated and the action of dedication. To contemplate that and to dedicate with a feeling of sincerity and a feeling of rejoicing at our own merit, and dedicating all of that merit with the awareness of emptiness. And this idea of dedicating is not so that we are going to, win the lottery or something like that, something worldly, but dedicating it so that we can realize the paths and the stages to full awakening, so that then we can be of great benefit to all beings. So Venerable Children really stress that it's really worth it to take time and do these dedications and make them really vast with this aspiration of bodhicitta that wants full awakening for the benefit of all beings. And so if you've ever been to any of the teachings by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he can spend hours and hours just on the dedication part. And, he's really trying to get the point across. It's important to make these very creative, very vast. And there's a great passage in this book by Geshe Sopa about why we need to make these dedication prayers so vast and what it is actually doing when we do this. So I'd like to read this section first from, this is volume 2 of the Steps on the Path to Enlightenment. So he says this, Lama Tsongkhapa says that those who experience good results by virtue of the actions of a Buddha or Bodhisattva do not need to have accumulated all of the merits and virtuous karma performed by those exalted beings, but they do have to have performed some portion of those positive deeds by themselves. In other words, there must be an appropriate relationship between their own virtuous karma and the results they experience. Without creating any of the virtuous actions that can act as the cause for such a happy result, you will not be able to meet that experience. You will not be born, for example, in a Pure Land. So no matter how much a bodhisattva may pray and dedicate his or her merits, such a being will not be able to place just anyone in that happy state. It is the combination of the bodhisattva's powerful prayer, together with the meritorious actions of the individual being benefited, and the dedication of merits by that individual toward the achievement of what the bodhisattvas have prayed for. That creates the relationship and the cause for such a happy result. The importance of making such expansive dedications explains why Tibetans frequently recite the following verses from the prayer of Samadabhadra, which goes, just as heroic Manjushri knew how, just as Samadabhadra also knew, I dedicate all this virtue so that I may learn to follow all their ways. So Geshe Sopa says, when you dedicate your merit in this way, you make a connection with the unlimited activities of these two great bodhisattvas, which they have dedicated to the welfare of all sentient beings. The karmic relationships are subtle and difficult to comprehend, but making this connection can bring about very great results. If you don't do anything from your own side, and if you don't make a connection to these bodhisattvas, you will not attain the benefit of their actions. So this is really compelling evidence. You know, the bodhisattvas have made incredible motivations to be of benefit to us. And if we don't, you know, speak of things that are going to connect with those motivations made by the bodhisattvas, then we're losing out. So it's to our benefit to be as creative as possible, to make, you know, really wild dedications, not only for ourselves, but for all sentient beings. And then, you know, we get this connection happening. So I thought that was very, very compelling evidence to just really go for it in our dedications.
Yes, and then Maitri maybe has.
Yes. I think Maitri isn't really a cat, but we'll stop there. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so then Venerable Children goes on to talk about how to divide the day into sessions when we're doing meditation. So this is if we're in retreat. So she says, divide the day into 4 sessions and make every effort temporarily, do short and numerous sessions in order to avoid laxity and excitement, ending your sessions on a good note. Once you've mastered these, you may prolong the sessions if you are free of laxity and excitement. So she says it's the best way to practice if you can do 4 sessions a day. So then she identifies when these can happen. The first session can be when you first get up. The second one can be between breakfast and lunch. The third session in the afternoon. And the fourth session in the evening. And this is the ideal way of setting it up if you're in retreat and you have a retreat schedule. And so if you can't do that, and of course we're not in retreat, you know, much of the time, then she says at least do a morning and evening session during the day and remember the topics that you're meditating on. So do short sessions to start with so that you can stay focused and so that you can end on a good note. And I remember hearing Jetsuna Tenzin Palmo talking to a group of mostly mothers in a talk she gave in Edmonton years ago. And all of these women were really wanting to have a practice, and they're all involved in raising children and having a full-time career and, you know, being spouses and, you know, having the social obligations that go along with having a family. And they're saying to her, to Jetsuna Tenzin Palmo, well, what do? We want to have a practice. And she said, you know, first of all, she said, what you're doing is your spiritual practice. Second of all, if you can get to the cushion for 10 minutes a day, that's fantastic. Start with that. Just start and make it short. If you try and skip days and then make up for it on the weekend and think you can do 75 minutes, you'll hate sitting there, you'll be resistant. The mind's like a wild horse, she said. If you just force yourself, the mind will get hard and it'll just get resistant and it'll just say after a few days, forget it, I'm too busy, I don't like it anyway. Just makes me crabby to sit and meditate for 75 minutes. So she said, do it in short bits. And that way you can leave on a good note and then you look forward to it the next day. And your mind is really interested in doing the meditation. She said that way you can build up and get a practice that grows and grows. So I think that's really wise advice. So getting back to the text, when we're starting out, we have to start with an amount of time that makes sense for us. Not too short, not too long, but an amount of time where we can stay comparatively focused, where we can practice well, we can arise from our cushion and feel refreshed, and then go about our daily life things. So if we can't do 4 sessions, do something later in the day, and also in the morning, but not so late in the day that you're totally exhausted. So don't leave your evening session until just before you go to bed, because you're going to have a lot of sleeping going on in that meditation. And then it becomes miserable because you're just so tired and you don't want to meditate. leaving you with not a great feeling. How many people know this one? I do. So then she gives some really great advice. The authors of the text give the great advice. Between sessions, don't put the topics meditated on out of your mind, but recall them again and again. I have to say I'm not always successful in this, even here. So don't meditate on something and forget about it during the day. That's like listening to teachings and forgetting about them afterwards. And then nothing sticks, of course. So in our Lamrim meditations, we want to try to hold them in our mind throughout the day and use whatever's happening in the day to remind us of that meditation. So, for example, a lot of us here have the opportunity to go for a walk in the forest. So, this might be after lunch, typically. Anyway, the advice is that, whatever we see on the walk we can use. So if we've done a meditation that day on precious human life, then when we see some insects on the ground, or occasionally a boa in the summer, or a chipmunk, or, birds, we can just think about, wow, what would it be like to be in that kind of body? So we're just walking along, but we're just bringing this to mind. What would it be like? Here's this rabbit on the path. Rabbits have this very, very sad technique of when they feel threatened, they freeze. They don't move. Well, if there's some predator around that sees them freezing because I'm walking by, then, that's somebody's lunch. So just to see how it is to be in the body of an insect, and looking up at, this human being that's, could end their life in a second. So she said, if we really make use of the break time like this and remembering the meditation topic, then the next time we actually do sit down to meditate, we've actually gained some ground rather than starting over every time we go to the cushion. How many people know that one? So she said, also, it's really important to watch, even when we're not in retreat, about what we're talking about, just throughout the day. And if we're really careless, or if we really get on a jag about what is in the media, then we all know that when we get back to the cushion, the energy in the mind is really revved up, and it's very difficult to get settled if we spent a lot of time of the day talking, especially talking about, not so important things, or very worldly things. That isn't to say that we, don't try and connect with people when we're, going about our day, but to just really watch that. So let's see what that says about that. Yeah, so there's distraction. So I was reading a section in this book by Thupten Jinpa. It's a very beautiful book. It came out this year, I think. It's called A Fearless Heart. And it's how the courage to be compassionate can transform our lives. And he talks about a very interesting thing in here that he calls the wandering mind. And how, sadly, this is a default state of our brain, mind. A recent study by two psychologists at Harvard University, Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, powerfully demonstrated two basic facts of our everyday mind, also recognized in Buddhist psychology. Our default state of mind is that of wandering, and this mind wandering is a source of unhappiness. In order to obtain real-life data, instead of conducting the experiment in a lab, the researchers used a method known as experience sampling, in this case with an iPhone app that they developed, which they called Track Your Happiness. In an initial study on 2,250 volunteers, the web-based app would ping the subjects at random intervals, asking them what they were doing at that moment and how happy they were, and whether they were thinking about their current activity or something else. And if they were thinking about something else, whether they were thinking about something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Participants chose from a list of 22 activities they might be doing. So it could have been working, walking, eating, resting, sleeping, shopping, commuting, watching television, and nothing special. So almost half the time, people reported that their minds were wandering. Okay, let's see. So the researchers found that when people were mind wandering, they reported feeling happy only 56% of the time, in contrast to 66% of the time when they are paying attention to their present moment activity. In their published results, the researchers suggest that mind wandering appears to be the human brain's or human mind's default mode of operation, and they concluded a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. So then there's some evidence that not all of the wandering mind is bad. For example, the creative mind, really is valuable. But anyway, the toxic part of mind wandering may have more to do with its self-referentiality than, as many may have suggested, with not being in the present moment. A disproportionate number of the thoughts in a wandering mind seem to be about I, me, mine. A cluster of brain regions implicated in self-referential thinking is strongly involved in mind wandering as well. And when our sense of self is involved, we tend to relate to others in the world around us with greater emotional and personal bias. In plain English, when we're thinking about ourselves, we tend to think we're more important than we are and feel that there's more at stake than there actually is. So much of our unhappiness associated with mind wandering may have to do with where our minds wander to, and the contrast we experience between the way things actually are. Hey, the world doesn't actually revolve around us. We're not supposed to be perfectly comfortable all the time or live forever. And the way we think, look at me, why me? So, the wandering mind. I'm sure there's going to be a song written about that. During meditation, probably. Knowing my luck. Okay. So, check our mind, as the teachers of the text say. Are we becoming biased? Are we becoming stubborn about something? And if we are, correct the mind and adjust the mind. Okay. And then the text goes on to talk about 4 causes for serenity and insight to arise easily. Serenity and insight are the long-term goals that we're aiming for. We cultivate them by doing all these Lamrim meditations, but what we're really trying to gain in these activities is we're trying to gain serenity and insight focused on emptiness, eventually. So, there's 4 causes that will allow this to arise easily. First of all, we need to control our senses. How attached we are to pleasant visual things, sounds, smells, tastes, to really control the senses. Now, how easy is that one? And not to let the mind wander outside to things that we can develop a lot of attachment for. So this is one reason, for example, why Buddhist monastics don't go out shopping for food. So at the Abbey, we do have to go into town and get other things like plumbing parts and getting tires changed and things like that, but we don't go shopping for food. And the reason for that is, can you imagine if we went in to Safeway to do that with the endless choices? I mean, first of all, we'd be gone for hours. Second of all, I'd be coming back for things that you don't like. And then this would really create a lot of disharmony, a lot of discord, not to mention the chaos in our minds. So that's one thing we don't do to help control this ability of us following our senses. So that's one. The second thing is to eat with moderation. This means eating healthy food and just the amount that our body needs to function. When we eat too much, what happens when you sit down to meditate? How's your mind? Sluggish? Hiccups?
Tired. Heavy.
Yeah, tired, heavy. And we just feel uncomfortable. So then the third thing is to strive in the yoga without sleeping. And when you do sleep, apply the body posture. So here, I'm not a yogi. I need to sleep. The idea is that we get the amount of sleep that our body needs and not oversleeping. Because as the teachers in this text point out, our precious human life is limited, and the most precious resource we have actually is our time. So according to this text, the best time to sleep is between 10 at night and 2 in the morning. 4 hours. I would love to be able to do that. I would love it to get up at 2:30 and start studying, or meditating. I would love it. I don't have the karma to do that. I just see how I am when I get, 5 hours sleep, or when we've gone to a forestry class and we're getting home at midnight and we're up at 5. I'm just a wreck. And so I just rejoice for the people who have that kind of karma. I don't yet. The other thing that Venerable Children said in her unpacking of this is that don't get the idea that we need a certain amount of sleep. Like, quite often in Psychology Today magazines, you'll see that we need 8 hours of sleep to be functioning human beings. And she said, if you get that stuck in your head, then, it's just going to make you miserable all the time, and you'll have that idea that's what you need. And she said, we can really sort of be flexible with this and play with this and still honor what it is that we need to function. And then she gives some advice about what to do before we go to bed at night. And so she says at night, the worst thing we could do is look at the news. The best thing to do is, to read something inspiring from a Dharma book or review our notes. And then just as we're about to get into bed, we make 3 prostrations. We can think about, the virtuous things we've done during the day. And then make sure that what we're thinking about as we're going to sleep is something virtuous. Because if we then start figuring out, didn't really like how that person looked at me at dinner, mess meal. If we start reviewing those kinds of things, then we go to bed with a grumpy mind. Guess what? We wake up with a grumpy mind. So those are not good techniques. She said, what you do when we wake up in the morning is also very important. So what do you do when you wake up in the morning? First thing, set our motivation, take refuge, generate bodhicitta. And with that kind of start, we're really in good shape. Okay. It is in big print, but I think I'm going to have to be really selecting now. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm going to do the next part for sure. This is really important. The next part has to do with why it's necessary to meditate using both meditation methods, which means, using methods that develop stability, which falls on the side of serenity, and cultivating analysis, which falls on the side of insight. So we've got to be able to do both. And the very great thing is that if we're doing the Lamrim meditations in the way that we're supposed to be doing them, then by doing them in the way that I'll describe in a minute, we are cultivating concentration and we are engaging in analysis. We need both of those. So, for example, if we're doing a meditation on precious human life, we contemplate the different points, and that's using analysis. And then at the end of the meditation, we want to develop this stability by focusing on the experience that comes from reflecting on the points. So at that point, when we've really got this, strong feeling, hopefully, that we've developed through through concentrating on these points, then we stop the analysis and we just focus on the experience. So the great news is the more we do the Lamrim meditations, the easier it becomes to meditate in general, and the easier it becomes to develop concentration. Okay. The teachers of the text go on to say that one of the reasons why Lamrim meditations are so important is because it really influences our ability to concentrate. Stability is when we're trying to stay one-pointedly on the meditation object. Analysis is where we're investigating or examining the meditation object. And then a number of misconceptions that people have about these two are refuted in the text. Because a lot of people think you should do one, you shouldn't do the other. And here's how these go. So one of them is that one single person should never do both of these practices. You should do one or the other. So for example, if you're a scholar, obviously you're going to just do analysis. And if you're a yogi, you're just going to do single-pointed meditation. And this is wrong. This is a wrong idea. Everybody needs to practice both. We need to be able to combine stabilizing and analytical meditations. We need to cultivate concentration and insight. Another misconception is that all conception is useless, because the people who hold this think that we're just grasping at inherent existence and that we have to get rid of this kind of thinking completely, like any thinking. And they say this kind of thinking is like clouds in the sky, you just have to get rid of them. And this is also incorrect. We have to learn how to think correctly and properly. We have to learn how to analyze and how to discern and discriminate in our meditation practice. So meditation is not just spacing out and getting all of our thoughts out of our mind and not trying to think about anything. In fact, if we made our practice of not trying to think about anything, this makes us very stupid. So you can see the mind is spaced out. So we want to overcome thinking eventually, and we want to let go of all of this discursive thought. But initially, right now, we need to, and for a long time, we need to know how to think properly, how to analyze and investigate, so that we can understand the Dharma correctly, meditate correctly, and understand these topics. Another misconception is that if a lot of analytical meditation is done prior to the arisal of meditative stabilization, that becomes an obstacle. And this is not true. If you do the analytical meditation about the benefits of taking refuge, for example, or developing bodhicitta, realizing emptiness, that helps your meditation on other topics. If you spend time doing analysis on the drawbacks of not relying on a spiritual teacher, not remembering that will also help you cut out these other different things. And His Holiness says this about our mind. He says, our mind's a very complicated thing, and it takes more than one kind of meditation to transform our mind. That's why we need many kinds of meditation to do a variety of things, because they work with different aspects of the mind. Not to just meditate on the breath, and that's all you do. If you do that, you won't develop the understanding of the Lamrim topics. And then the text goes on to talk about having relied on spiritual masters, how to progressively train our mind. And now we shift into the meditation on precious human life. So, all human life is not necessarily a precious human life, because we have to have the 8 freedoms and 10 fortunes to have a precious human life. Otherwise, you can be born as a human being and have no interest in spiritual matters whatsoever. Just having a human body doesn't give you a precious human life. You have to have these 18 factors. So it's interesting as we go through the 18 right now to see if you have them or not. And then it might be very interesting to reflect, as we've all done in the past, at what point did we get all these 18, and do we have them now? So there's 8 situations that we're free from, and there's 10 situations that we're fortunate to have. And the 8 freedoms are divided into four. So there's 4 non-human states, and there's 4 human states. So the 4 human non-freedoms are the following. Being born in a distant land. So this is being born in an uncivilized place, where any kind of spiritual practice is outlawed or ignored, or it's a very barbaric kind of society. So I used to think that being born and raised in central Alberta was probably being born in a barbaric place. But in fact, that isn't true, and you might think about where you were born too. Because being born in a barbaric place, there were all kinds of temples in Alberta that I didn't know about in the cities. So there was Buddhism going on in the, Asian communities. There was spiritual practice happening that wasn't Buddhist, but still, people were practicing. So it wasn't totally barbaric. But I don't know if I'll get to all these quotes in this book tonight, but Patrul Rinpoche has a great description of what it means to be born in a barbaric place amongst barbarians. So barbarians are those who live in the 32 border countries. They are people who consider harming others as an act of faith, or whose savage beliefs see taking life as good. These people inhabiting the outlying territories have human form, but their minds lack the right orientation and they can't attune themselves to the Dharma. Everything they do is evil, and it's in the techniques of such harmful activities like killing insects and hunting wild beasts that they truly excel. Many of them fall into lower realms as soon as they die. For such people, there's no opportunity to practice the Dharma. So the next human non-freedom is being born with incomplete senses. So this is usually explained as being mentally incapacitated. So this includes being deaf, being unable to speak, or being blind. So in ancient times, of course, this was a huge obstacle because, how would you read the Dharma texts, or how would you hear? But now this is not such a great obstacle. I mean, it still makes it difficult. But having a kind of mind that is not able to understand what the teachings are, that's a really big obstacle. And then the third one is holding wrong views, and this is the worst of all of them. So if we have wrong views, it cuts off any interest in the Dharma. We don't go to teachings, we don't explore things, we don't take the teachings seriously. And if we have a mind that disparages the teachings and emptiness, then we create a huge amount of negative karma. And that gives ourselves permission basically to do whatever we want. And then we create even more negative karma. So with this kind of situation, our mind's very closed and does not have certain beliefs and things that are valuable. And this influences how we live our life, how we relate to other people, and what we consider ethical. So it's in that way that wrong views really put a huge limit on our spiritual practice. And then the fourth one is living where the conqueror's teachings don't exist. So for example, a wheel-turning Buddha hasn't descended like Shakyamuni Buddha. So Venerable Children goes on to say that the way to meditate on these four is to imagine having that kind of birth, to go through each one carefully. Imagine it so well that you just become it in your meditation session. And imagine what your life is like. And really, really get into it. So it's probably really worthwhile to do some research on what it's like to be, mentally handicapped. Maybe we know people like that. We can draw on our experience of maybe family members or working in a situation where we've worked with people with those limitations. So she said, really embrace that in your meditation session. And then, then come back to who you are right now and just, rejoice that we don't have that impediment. And that's how it can really inspire us, too, to be careful about the karma that we create. And then there's 4 non-human states. So the first one is being born in hell. So imagine that you're born in that kind of realm, and imagine that there's this endless physical pain and suffering. And for some people, this whole hell realm topic is rather difficult. So then the advice given is that, well, imagine being born in a war zone. So, we've got a lot of information available to us now about what it might be like to be in that situation. I found something today on the internet about what it's like to be in Syria right now. So, Syria is now in its 5th year of, this brutal civil war. More than half of the population has just fled. They've left their homes, they've left the country. Life expectancy in Syria has fallen by 20 years. So why are Syrians leaving their homes? There's 3 reasons, just to give you an idea of what this hell realm there is like. Well, first of all, there's the violence. Since this war began, 320,000 people have been killed, including nearly 12,000 children. About 1.5 million people have been wounded or permanently disabled. Let's see. Interestingly enough, the war has become more deadly since foreign powers joined the conflict. The second thing going on is that there's a collapsed infrastructure. Within Syria, healthcare, education systems, and other infrastructure have been destroyed. The economy is shattered. The third thing is children's safety. You know, these kids, the nation's hope for a better future is just sort of like crumbling every moment. These kids aren't going to school. They're constantly witnessing violence and brutality. And now groups like ISIL are forcibly recruiting the young kids to serve as fighters and human shields and using them to train others. So, you know, we can really get a feel for what a hell realm was like on the planet if a hell realm as a place where our mind can go is difficult. The second kind of realm that's really disadvantageous is a preta mind. And this kind of mind is just preoccupied with hunger and craving. There's absolutely no space for the Dharma. And so the pretas run around constantly looking for food. And because they have these long, thin necks, they might get something in their mouth. Eventually they can eat, but it can't make it down their throat. And if they do get something that makes it down their throat, it feels like hot burning metal. So they're constantly craving. And this craving causes them so much harm. And then there's the animal realm, so we can, you know, this is a realm that we can see. So we can take a look at all of the creatures around the Abbey and the cats. And it doesn't matter how many mantras we say to Maitri and Karuna and Mudita. They're going to get imprints, you know, but they're just not going to understand the Dharma in this life. So again, Venerable Children said, think of these different states. Really get your mind in that place. Imagine what it's like to be in that kind of realm. And then, again, bring yourself back to your present state and again rejoice that this is not happening. Oh, sorry, I forgot the long-lived God realm. Sorry. So this includes all gods, but especially the fourth material God realm. They only recognize where they're born and when they die. Otherwise, they're spaced out in a meditative state, almost like being drugged. So, the 10 fortunes. We'll go through these a bit more quickly. There's 5 personal good fortunes and there's 5 general good fortunes. So the first one is being born as a human being. We have this human intelligence, and His Holiness says a lot about this. And he says that this precious human intelligence that we have is so precious because if we use it wisely, we can do so many things. And if we don't use it wisely, we can do so many incredibly awful things. The second one is being born in a central land, which there's different ways of defining this. One way is geographic. So the central land is Bodh Gaya, or according to the Vinaya, it's where you have the fourfold Sangha. The third personal fortune is having complete senses, especially a sound mind. The fourth one is that we haven't committed the 5 heinous actions, which are killing our mother and father, killing an arhat, causing a schism in the Sangha, and drawing blood from a Buddha. And these are said to be so negative that according to the fundamental vehicle, you can't purify them in this life. And at the time of death, you automatically go to a lower realm. Fortunately, in the Mahayana tradition, it can be purified, even in this very life. And the fifth one is having faith in the 3 baskets, the Vinaya basket, the Sutra basket, and the Abhidharma basket. The 5 fortunes from the side of society. Well, I'm going to take the time right now to read this one section again from Patro Rinpoche, where he talks about it. It's just really inspiring. So if you can hang on here. Let's see. He talks about it in a way that I haven't read this before. So a Buddha has appeared and has preached the Dharma. His teachings still exist and can be followed. There are those who are kind-hearted towards others. Those not born in a bright kalpa, one in which a Buddha has appeared, have never even heard of the Dharma. But we are now in a kalpa in which a Buddha has come, and so we possess the advantage of the presence of the particular teacher. Although a Buddha has come, if he had not taught, no one would benefit. But since the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, according to the 3 levels, we have the advantage of the teaching of the Dharma. Although he has taught, had his doctrine died out, it would no longer be there to help us. But the period during which the doctrine will remain extant has not yet ended, so we have the advantage of the time. Although the teachings still exist, unless we follow them, they can be of no benefit to us. But since we have taken up the Dharma, we possess the advantage of our own good fortune. Although we've taken up the Dharma, without the favorable circumstances of being accepted by a spiritual friend, we would never come to know what the Dharma is really about. But since the spiritual friend has accepted us, we possess the advantage of his extraordinary compassion. Because these 5 factors need to be complete with regard to circumstances other than one's own, they are called the 5 circumstantial advantages. And it goes on to talk about all these other times, these kalpas where Buddhas appear and they don't appear, and there's a huge amount of times. So we can rejoice that we're in a period where... Okay, so here we are. In this good kalpa, at the present time, when the span of a human life is 100 years, the perfect Buddha, Shakyamuni, has come to the world. And so this one that we're in is called a bright kalpa. So the text goes on to say, there are people with all the lineages, with all the teachings who can teach us. And there are people who have realizations of the 3 higher trainings of true paths and true cessations who teach us and can monitor our meditation. And there is a tradition still alive of living masters who can impart the teachings to us orally and by their living and being a living example. Having this lineage of masters, either of the transmitted Dharma, who can teach us, or the lineage masters of the realization Dharma, people who have meditated and gained realizations can pass this on to us. So it's important so that when we meet these people, we can be sure we've met with the authentic Dharma, especially meeting with people with different tantric lineages who, when we're prepared, can give us initiation and guide us in that practice. It's very difficult to have this kind of situation. The 4th thing that's beneficial is the presence of Buddhist followers. So we have a Sangha community following the Buddha's teachings. We have a place where there's like-minded people who can give us moral support and inspire us in our practice. We're living in a place where there are followers of the Buddha. And again, ask ourselves, have I always had this condition? When did this condition come about? And the 5th one is a place where there are people with loving compassion and concern. So there are people right now who are benefactors who will support us materially in our practice. There's Dharma teachers who make sure that we have the 4 requisites. We need to have food, clothing, shelter, and medicine in order to practice. To live in a place where there are benefactors and patrons who believe in what we're doing and will support us. Without these people, the alternative for monastics at least is that we have to put on lay clothes, get a job, and that cuts into the time to practice. And sometimes in a lay job, we have to do things that are ethically misguided. So it's extremely important if we are monastics that we treasure the support from our lay supporters and do everything we can to practice well, to repay that kind of kindness. So the last instruction is contemplating these. Imagine not having these situations, and then come back to who we are now and let yourself feel tremendous gratitude. When you meditate on precious human life, you should feel like a beggar who has found a jewel. Okay, I think I'm going to do a lot of skipping here. Let's see. All right. I'm going to skip ahead to how to take advantage of our precious human life. So, there's three kinds of beings. There's these three general capacities. And these three levels of or capacities actually stem from a teacher's lamp on the path. So because I'm a visual kind of person, I'm going to use this chart that I have to talk through these three, which will be a review, because everyone here knows this inside and out, right? So I'm not sure if this will show up on the camera, but this will just help me talk through this. So there's three levels of practitioners, and the whole thing about the Lamrim is that we can actually practice any of these three levels at any time, but when we're first starting, it's really good to start with the practices that are described as being the initial level practitioner. So there's two kinds of practitioners at the initial level. And the first kind of person is only interested in this life. So the person will do these practices, but you know what? They don't want to look further ahead. They're not interested in looking ahead. They just want to get things happening well in this life. So this is described as an ordinary person. They just want the happiness of this life. The second kind of person at the initial level is interested in a good rebirth. In fact, both of these people are interested in a good rebirth. But this second kind of person is actually called a special initial capacity person. And this kind of person is caring about their future lives. So they think about their future lives, but actually at this point they can't think about everybody yet. They're just thinking about their own thing. So they're not thinking really about Buddhahood yet, and they can't really think about getting out of samsara yet. Not yet. So when I think about this kind of practitioner, I used to teach with a fellow who was, first of all, a magnificent teacher. He was just so skilled. He was an extremely kind person. He was interested in spiritual things, but he always talked about the fact that in his next life, he was going to come back and be a wealthy Asian merchant. That was it. A wealthy Asian merchant living in Hong Kong. Well, great. He was a really great person. He was my role model as a teacher. But you know what? That was his thing. Next time, rich merchant. So maybe at some point maybe he's already stumbled across the Dharma. I haven't seen him in years. So who knows, right? Because he is a really good person. So then this special initial capacity person, though, who does have a take on the fact that, yes, you know, I want a good rebirth, but so they may practice for a while, and if they keep hearing Dharma teachings and contemplating them, and of course they will, then at some point they'll say, yeah, working for a good rebirth, it's a good idea, but it's not an end in itself. And my real goal is actually to get out of cyclic existence altogether, and I need a good rebirth to do that. So the initial capacity being, both of these people create the causes for a good rebirth by practicing ethical conduct. So basically that's abandoning the 10 non-virtues, and at the very least keeping the 5 precepts. So then the middle capacity being is a person who has done, you know, more reflection and contemplation, possibly. And this kind of person wants to get off the merry-go-round of samsara. So now they're at the point where they're creating the causes to get out, And they're practicing the 3 higher trainings, which are ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom. And then the higher level capacity being, they know that rebirth is good, it's necessary, but it's limited. Getting out of samsara is very good, and it's very limited, because there are all of these living beings, and they've been so kind to me, and they want happiness just like I do. And I can't just go about caring about myself, my own liberation, when there are all these other people out there that also want to get out. So this kind of being has a deeper capacity and a broader mind. They're not just thinking of the short term and themselves. They're thinking about working for the benefit of all beings for eternity, and creating the causes to become a fully awakened being in order to work for the benefit of others. So there's this phrase that's being used with the initial level practitioner and the middle capacity being, and that's in common with. So it doesn't mean that we're only ever an initial level practitioner, because we've had the good fortune of meeting teachers who have constantly been telling us about cultivating bodhicitta. So even though we're continuing to create non-virtue, I'll speak for myself, even though that's going on, I'm not just an initial level practitioner, because somewhere in my mind there is this little thought, that, I do want to do this. I do want to become fully awakened for the benefit of all sentient beings, even if it's fabricated. That still makes us just, if we're doing the initial level practices, we're doing it in common with an initial level practitioner. Same thing with the middle capacity being. It's in common with. So we're not just one, we're not just that. We're in common with those beings when we're doing those certain practices, because of this bodhicitta, this aspiration that we keep cultivating all day long. Then eventually, the phrase in common with doesn't apply to the higher level capacity being, because then we're there. So I thought just seeing how this text lays out the progression, how important the Lamrim is, how important it is to start with these practices at the initial level, and then to go cycling through the Lamrim topics, which cover all of these, and to, just be really gracious about accepting where we're at, but to also keep doing these other practices so that we keep planting the seeds and we keep cultivating this bodhicitta over and over and over, so that this eventually really can have an impact on our mind. So when we practice the paths of the initial and middle level beings, it helps us see the disadvantages of samsara. We have to be able to see it for ourselves, and then to see that everyone is worthy of liberation as well, to become a Buddha, so that I can lead others to liberation. In order to cultivate the kind of compassion that we need in order to actualize bodhicitta, we need to see the depth of other beings suffering from samsara. And to see that in others, we have to see it in our own life. Because if we can't see this in our own life, then we'll never be able to see it for others. So if by looking at our own situation, we're not horrified and appalled, then how will we ever feel horror and be feeling appalled by looking at the situation of other sentient beings? And without that feeling of being horrified and appalled, then we're not going to be able to cultivate this strong compassion that's necessary to compel us to do something about it. Just happened. Okay. I think it's probably okay if we do this. And so, having said that, there was a story in the news this week about a woman in Toronto, just to get the feeling for this, having this strong feeling of, horror for what's going on in others. 2 women were out a week ago today, actually, in Toronto. They were in an underground shopping mall. One woman was 28 years old, and she was just in Shoppers Drug Mart, picking up something for the weekend, no doubt. Another woman, who was 40 years old, went into Shoppers Drug Mart with a knife. And she approached this woman that she didn't know, and she stabbed her. And at first, the person who was stabbed, was quickly taken away, and the perpetrator was arrested. And at first it was, the person was in the hospital, but in grave condition. 2 days ago, the woman who was stabbed died. So the most incredible thing is, these 2 women did not know each other. The woman who did the stabbing is 40 years old. She has a master's degree in business. She's a very accomplished person at what she was doing at her work. Her friends said only, great things about her. She has no previous record of anything. They do not know the motivation yet. And so out of the blue, this woman one day picked up a knife and walked into a store and stabbed someone. The person who was stabbed is 28 years old. She just got married 6 months ago. She was just starting the weekend last Friday. She had her whole life ahead of her. And, to see this kind of thing, it's just, those kind of stories, you really see how samsara is horror. To see the suffering of the person to see the suffering mind of the perpetrator, to think about the causes and conditions that were created in the past by the person who was stabbed. All of that is just, we can take this to the cushion when we hear stories of this and like this, and just really contemplate the fact that, there is so much, from our previous lives that we don't even know about, waiting to ripen. And here we are. We've met an authentic teacher. We're getting these practices. We're repeating things day in, day out. Cultivating bodhicitta, cultivating refuge, studying. And by doing this, we're really, really setting ourselves up to not be in a situation where, kaboom, this other karma ripens. So I think we can really rejoice that we have, the situation that we're in. We can continue reviewing these teachings. We can continue doing the Lamrim meditations. And to conclude, I'll read what Venerable Chögyam has to say about the path. She says this: the vast path refers to the practice of bodhicitta. All method aspects of the path create a lot of merit. And also practice the profound path, meaning the realization of emptiness. Know the ultimate nature of yourself and the actions you are doing, the merit you are creating. We have to know the order of all these different practices, the number of these practices, how they link up with each other, and cease contenting ourselves with an incomplete method to Buddhahood. If you really want to achieve Buddhahood, you have to learn the full method, the full whole path. Let's do that. There's been a request for us to do the dedication prayers while it's streaming. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all
sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born and no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Fearless Supreme, Spiritual Leader, Omniscient King of the Shakyas, Mother Vitara, Supreme Bestower of longevity and wisdom, vast ocean assembly of sources of refuge, grant propitiousness here and now for a nectar of benefit and bliss to flow. With a clear mind of extensive learning gained from following the wondrous traditions of Tuptim, the Able One's teachings, you bring clarity to masses of disciples with the light of children, the lamp of the Dharma. May your lotus feet remain unfaltering for a very long time. Through your dharmic deeds of hearing, thinking, meditating, and so on, place those who seek the liberated path in harmony through immaculate discipline. Please lead all beings to liberation with undeclining excellent qualities of scripture and insight, and establish them in the glory of eternal bliss. May the deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and non-violent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the West. Flourish.